Hello, good morning, and welcome everyone to this CIVITAS ECCENTRIC webinar on mobility stations for flexible and sustainable urban transport. I'm really happy that you managed to join in today. My name is Paula Land. I'm your moderator today. I work for ICLE Local Governments for Sustainability, which is a global city network of over 1,750 local governments across the world who are committed to sustainable urban development. And ICLE is a partner in the CIVITAS ECCENTRIC project, which is bringing you this webinar today. As you might have seen, we have two speakers who will be presenting today, but before we jump into the content, I would like to give a quick introduction into GoToWebinar and how we can use it to engage with the speakers, and how you as the audience can use GoToWebinar to ask questions, chat, or even talk in person to the presenters. So you have the options to mute yourself and unmute yourself if we as the organizers give you the right to do so. If you would like to ask a question, you can raise your hand. You can see there's a raise hand button where the arrow is pointed right now. If you raise your hand, we can unmute your microphone and give you presenter rights. Speaking rights, and you can ask your question directly to one of the presenters. And you also have the opportunity to ask questions. If you don't want to speak to the entire audience, you can just type in your question. I will make sure that I ask this question to the presenters. And I think since we're so many today and you're tuning in from all across Europe and maybe all across the world, I think it could be really interesting to just see where everyone is calling in from. So I would like to first of all ask everyone to just type into the question pane the country or city you are calling in from. So get started, click on questions and type in your answers. Great, okay. I can see two people are calling in from London. We have somebody from Venice in Italy, another person calling in from Belgium, and from Antwerp, also Belgium. We have attendees from Portugal, Finland, Lyon in France, Berlin, Bremen in Germany, Austria, Budapest, Luxembourg, Trieste in Italy, Madrid, Dortmund, again, Madrid. Okay, so I would say hello to all of you and welcome to this webinar. Thanks for answering the question. And I'm curious who you are as attendees, so I would like to ask a poll question to the audience. So please, you should see now a question to the audience. Please answer what kind of organization do you represent, so we get a better understanding of who is in the audience today. You have the option to choose local authority, NGO, an academic institution, a consulting company, or a regional authority. So please submit your answers now. I can see most of you have voted. Still some answers coming in, great. By the way, Madrid, good use on the flag emoji when giving your answer. Well done. Great, okay, so I can see most of you have voted. I will close the poll now so we can see. Let's share the results. All right, so we can see that 30% roughly represent a local authority, 23% of you are from an NGO. Then we have some academic institutions, some consulting companies, and also I must think maybe one or two regional authorities. Great, so thank you very much for this. And back to my presentation. So now you're quite familiar with the use of GoToWebinar. And I would also like to mention that we are recording this webinar, and the recording of the webinar will be made available to you afterwards, and it will also be available on YouTube if you want to share it with your colleagues. Yeah, so just so you know that you are being recorded. So about today, what's the lineup for today? We have two speakers, as I already mentioned. On the very left, that's me, I'm the moderator. I'm Officer Sustainable Economy and Procurement at ICLE. Then we have with us Stefan Sinek, who is EU Project Manager for the CIVITAS ECCENTRIC project at the City of Munich. and he will be introducing to us the mobility stations in Munich. And then we also have Caroline Zimmer with us, who is research associate at the chair of urban structure and transport planning at the TU Munich. And she's also the local evaluation manager for the Eccentric project in Munich. And she will share with us some lessons learned about the implementation of mobility stations in Munich. So a quick look at the agenda. Right now, I'm giving you this wonderful introduction, and then we will move on quickly to Stefan, who will present on mobility stations for flexible and sustainable transport in Munich. And then this is followed by a presentation from Caroline on the lessons learned on drivers and barriers when implementing these mobility stations. And then, of course, at the end, we have time for questions and some closing remarks. So just a quick introduction to the CIVITAS ECCENTRIC project that I've already mentioned. ECCENTRIC is a 4-year project that is funded by the EU. It is in its final year now, so we already have quite some results and many measures have already been implemented. But the general approach of the project is that in 5 living lab, the project seeks to demonstrate the potential and replicability of integrated and inclusive urban planning approaches, as well as innovative policies and emerging technologies. The cities that are involved in this project are Madrid, Stockholm, Munich, from whom we'll hear today, Turku in Finland, and Russia in Bulgaria. And those cities demonstrate and test innovative sustainable mobility policies and projects in peripheral areas, as well as combining new policies and technologies and soft measures. The project focuses on 2 important areas that have previously maybe received a little bit less attention in urban mobility planning. On the one hand, the project focuses on innovative solutions for sustainable mobility of people in suburban districts, so focusing a bit more on the periphery and not so much the center. And it also looks at emission-free logistics in urban centers that keep the balance between quality public space and efficient local economy. So it also has a focus on freight. The project in brief, it has 6 thematic core areas and 50 measures that are implemented in these core areas among the 5 cities that I just introduced. The 6 thematic areas cover inclusive urban planning, mobility as a service, safe walking and cycling, clean public transport, clean vehicles, and clean freight and logistics. And as I mentioned before, we are in the concluding phase of the project. We're currently producing a range of materials that can help other cities learn from the project, replicate some of the measures that have been implemented, and get in touch with some of the cities that have implemented these measures. So I would also encourage you to keep an eye out for future publications and keep a look out on the website of CIVITAS ECCENTRIC, where you can find a range of material. A quick introduction into today's topic, which is the promotion of car-independent lifestyles. So as many of you know, there's a couple of challenges that cities at the moment deal with, and that raise the need to promote car-independent lifestyles. So first of all, cities are faced with urban growth and even urban sprawl, which then results in a competing demand for space. Cities need to balance the need for low carbon mobility with the need for mobility and attractive and healthy cities. And especially some policies such as car owner-centered policies and mobility can hamper the promotion of sustainable mobility and car-independent lifestyles. For example, this policy of 1 parking spot per housing unit can increase the demand for parking, whereas maybe this space could be used slightly differently as well. And then another challenge that cities encounter is that sustainable mobility options often appear scattered. If travelers want to combine trips, for example, a bike trip with a public transport trip, it might not always be so easy to combine all these options because the information about them is quite scattered. So those are the general challenges, and the different cities in CIVITAS ECCENTRIC have a range of measures that address these challenges, and I would just like to pick out a few from each city. But as I said before, please visit our website also, where you can find information about all measures. So for example, Stockholm has built an online portal to inspire citizens to try out new and more sustainable modes of transport. Madrid has implemented a range of measures enabling safe walking and cycling outside of the city center. The city of Turku has focused on mobility as a service and smart multimodal mobility services. And in Russe, they have built an internet portal and mobile app for public transport. Again, as I said, more information can be found on the website. And this is also all for me and for my introduction. I really hope you enjoyed this webinar. I would like to now hand the word to Stefan from the City of Munich to give us more of an insight into Munich's mobility stations. Hi, Stefan. I think you can share your screen now.
Hello, everybody. Welcome from my side. My name is Stefan Sünek. I'm working for the Department of Public Order for the City of Munich, and I want to present you a little bit more about the mobility stations, what we implemented in Munich. So, many cities, big cities, especially in Europe, are facing the same challenges. Like Paula already told us, we have a lot of problems with congestions, with parcel delivery, emissions, high pollution. Maybe not the picture on the right side with the queuing right now during the Corona times, but we all know we have big challenges and we have to face them. So I want to skip this chart now because Paula already told the most important facts and figures about the CIVITAS ECCENTRIC project. Let me just go back to the special feature of CIVITAS ECCENTRIC. We are talking about laboratory quarters. We call them living labs, and they are situated in the city center outskirts. So there we know that the car dependency and the rate of car ownership is higher than in the city center, for example. So there is a need to do something for more sustainable transport. And CIVITAS ECCENTRIC tries integration of mobility and housing. So we implement the measures in housing areas. Coming to our living lab in Munich, it's divided in two districts. The first one is Domag Park and the second one is Parkstadt Schwabing, but they are connected. You see them at the right side. It's the blue colored area. And overall, we have 8,000 residents there, living in more than 3,000 housing units. There are also a lot of companies there in the living lab with more than 12,000 daily commuters. And in Munich, we work together overall with 7 partner institutions. So, for example, Caroline Zimmer is one of our partner working for the Technical University of Munich. And we implemented 11 measures, and the mobility stations are one of these measures. Going a little bit more in detail, referring our living lab, they are quite different, the two districts. The Domag Park is completely newly developed. So how you can see at the map, it's very green. There are a lot of parks. It's very family friendly. New houses were built there, so completely new developed, and it's a kind of village character there and a kind of modern living. So it's also very bicycle friendly and family friendly. In kind of contrast, the Parkstadt Schwabing, how you see in the pictures below, it's more a business district. We have, like I told you, more than 12,000 commuters there, and it's so near to the Autobahn in the north of Munich. So you need only 1 minute to the Autobahn. So it's very car friendly for commuters. And it's not completely new developed. It's still ongoing process, the developing of this area. But many companies, like really big players, like Microsoft, for example, the headquarter of Germany, Osram, MAN, or also Fujitsu Siemens are situated there for several years, and the residents are only 4,000, and yeah, commuters 3 times more. So the background of our project in Munich is that, especially in this northern area of Munich, where the Living Lab is situated, we have growing numbers twice as fast as the overall city of Munich, and therefore an increasing number of mobility and road users, especially in the north, with the well connection to the Autobahn. And we have actually limited alternatives to individual car use. So there is no subway, there's no train connection. We have buses, we have tram, but 10 minutes to walk, or 5 to 10 minutes. And we know that these outskirts, the center periphery districts, are typically no business case for mobility sharing providers. So normally they go to the city center, they go to the airport, or maybe to fair trades, but not to this typical residential districts in the outskirts of bigger towns. Our goal with the intermodal mobility stations was to provide for the first time in public space a hub, mobility hub, with as many different mobility services as possible, and to allow residents to live a private car-free lifestyle, or to have at least significant lower mobility costs. For example, when you abolish a second car of your household because you have the new mobility options. So therefore, as a consequence, we hope to create less traffic congestion, less air pollution, and overall an improved quality of life. So looking at the map where all the mobility stations are situated, let me first go to the blue ring. This is a mobility station at private ground. It was implemented already before ECCENTRIC started in May 2016, and it was a integrated mobility concept of housing development, so subsidized by the municipality of Munich. And actually the public mobility stations, what I'm talking about and what we did in ECCENTRIC, the first ones were implemented in July 2018. It was the mobility station Domark South, and it was the mobility station Parkstadt Schwabing North. They were opened at the same time, the same day. A third one was finished this January 2020 in the Domark Park North, and a fourth one actually had to be already finished, but there are still a lot of construction works and new planning of streets ongoing in the south of the Parkstadt Schwabing. So we had to switch the plans actually for the fourth mobility station, and it will be a little bit out of the core Living Lab area, but this is because of the construction works. So coming to the innovative aspects of these mobility stations, well, it's intermodal mobility station, so it combines various modes of shared transportations. So multimodal, intermodal mobility stations, we are offering new mobility services, like for example, e-scooters, e-cars, charging infrastructure. I will show you later what kind of offers we have there. And we created completely new road traffic signs, and also the design for the markings. So we developed it in workshops, like you see on the left side, the green colored markings at the ground for exclusively reserved parking spaces in Munich. And we created our own road traffic signs for e-car sharing, for example, or car sharing or e-scooter parking. And we combined these measures and signs with the new regulations, the new laws that enable reserving parking space only for car sharing vehicles. This is a new law in Germany and in Bavaria. So it's only allowed to park your car at park sharing lots and not for normally cars. And also new was that we did a lot of marketing, a lot of promotion and communication campaigns. So I worked together with two communication and marketing agencies. They are running our Instagram channel, YouTube, Facebook channel for Eccentric, and we did a lot of promotion, especially for the mobility stations and ongoing promotion. So this is very important aspect. And we did, for example, like clips for a mobility station, explaining clips and interview statements from stakeholders, why mobility stations are important and so on. We also invented some promotional material like base caps, jackets, t-shirts with the design for the mobility stations. And the City of Munich is the provider of the mobility stations. So it's not a private ground, it's on public ground. And so we are the hub and the platform for all interested private mobility suppliers, also in the future. So coming to the development of these mobility stations, we started with participation of different stakeholders. We did an interdisciplinary working group for the mobility stations, also with the Living Lab residents, district committee, city planners, how to develop it with regard to the design, the location, the size also. And we identified 4 mobility stations and the best location, and this was approved by a holistic spatial analysis. So it's quite a difference if you implement mobility station in a completely newly developed district like the Domark. So there it was really easy. So we had to free choose where more or less where we want to implement it, because there was no housing before. There was first street and there was no parking lots before. So no restrictions and no complaints by residents. You don't take away parking lots which were parking for free before. And in Parkstadt Schwabing, there was high pressure, well, there's still high pressure of parking and of traffic, and there it's a lot of more complicated to find the right spot for the mobility stations. We knew that the idea is that it has to be in the middle of the residential area, so near access in walking distance, right to next door of the people where they live, and it has to be, because of this intermodal character, connection to the public transport. So we have trams and buses there, so it should be in walking distance or cycling distance. When we opened the first 2 stations in July 2018, we did a lot of promotion. We gained the mayor of Munich to get there, also with press. All relevant stakeholders were there. We did a ceremony there with music and was a big festival. And the important part is also that you don't just implement all these measures when there's opening ceremony. In our view, it's also very important to keep on going with these promotion activities. For example, to offer the residents trial offers for the mobility services. To keep on with the social media campaigns on the different social media channels. What we have also is a direct and dialogue marketing campaign. So now in 2020, we run the third wave of the direct and dialogue marketing. So we address every single household there, every single resident there with our campaign that they can and try for free for 1 or 2 weeks their sharing offers. And this is an ongoing process because the residents are changing, new people coming to district, new commuters are going there, and people have to get aware of this, and it's very important in our view. Yeah, now we have 3 or 4 stations already implemented, and all relevant providers of e-mobility and sharing corporations are integrated there. There is no like strict size or concept for a mobility station in Munich. So there is a kind of variation of especially the size, the number of car sharing spots and what kind of car sharing spots. What we have at all mobility stations is the information pillar. You see it in the second picture. This pillar is just like an information pillar where you see what kind of mobility services are offered there, just for orientation. We have the MVG bike sharing station at every single mobility station. This is the local bike sharing provider of the City of Munich. We have 2 different providers of free-floating bike sharing. We have 1 provider of free-floating e-scooters. This is the red one at the third picture. We have normally 2 charging stations at the mobility station, and we have 1 stationary and 3 free-floating providers for car sharing. Normally they provide 1 to 2 cars for e-car sharing, and yeah, depending on the mobility station, 1 to 2 privileged e-parking spots and 6 to 10 car sharing spots, so the green ones. Yeah, an important aspect always, maybe also for you, is the costs. And talking about the costs with regard to the mobility stations, you have to differentiate between the costs per station and costs overall, like for all the stations. So costs for infrastructure, you can calculate it for the station. Cost for planning, communication, and also kind of operating costs. They are, let's say, for you have a lot of investment at the beginning, but when you implement more and more stations, of course, it gets cheaper. The ratio gets cheaper. So we have fixed costs of infrastructure and variable costs of planning, communication. So it really depends what kind of planning, promotion activities you do. If you go to the social media channels, and yeah, so it's a kind of difficult to tell you a fixed number of the costs, but I will advise you to have more in detail look maybe later on in this presentation if you're really interested in the single costs of the measures and we had to implement during our implementation of the mobility stations. So what is the lesson we learned and what's the outlook for upskilling, also replication? We have important drivers. One important driver is for sure that we implemented a parking management in the area around the mobility stations. So we implemented a parking management in 2019. So first, when the mobility station in Domag Park was opened in 2018, there was no parking management. So it was free parking around the mobility station. What happened there was that a lot of the commuters of the southern district, so the Parkstadt Schwabing, went there and parked their car illegal at the reserved car sharing spots. And when we implemented 1 year later or half a year later, the parking management, so the parking time was limited to 2 or 4 hours, we observed that there were less cars parking in this area overall and almost no illegal parking at the car sharing spots. The second driver is the marketing activities, especially social media marketing, trial offers, direct speech to the residents and employees, dialogue marketing, and yeah, you really have to push this in our view, and to really promote the offers of the mobility stations, the advantage, and so on. And also, it's important in our view the continuous communication with the sharing providers. There are always some changes, especially now in the Corona time. So we will see how this business will go on. It's kind of difficult right now, what we heard. But it's also an important point to be in contact with the sharing providers with regard to their fleet, so what kind of cars they can provide. And what we detected was that in the city outskirts, more people rent a car or share a car, take them from the outskirts and go to the city center, but not the same number of people bring the car back. So we requested our sharing providers to relocate the cars and also the scooters or bikes to the mobility stations, that they are not empty the next day. Important barriers is that yeah, the ongoing dependence on construction progress. So therefore we have only now 3 instead of 4 stations realized. So this is a kind of challenge. Another problem is maybe only in Germany, special traffic law that we have limited surveillance possibilities of car sharing parking. So I told you there was first time this problem without a parking management, that there was a lot of illegal parking. And when we saw, or the police saw, these cars illegal parking at reserved car sharing spots, we could not find them and punish them. It was not part of the German traffic law, but it will be registered this year, but until now it's still a problem. And we do not have a citywide mobility station concept. So we have also some other mobility stations in other projects in Munich, and they are not colored with the green color, for example. They have, for example, another information pillar. So talking about costs, for example, we pay about 1,000 euro for this information pillar. And in another project of mobility stations in Munich, they invented information pillar with a touch screen, so digitalized information pillar, and that one cost 40,000 euros. But as we know, we'll come to this later. Caroline will tell you the use of the information pillar is not so big that you can argument for 40,000 instead of 1,000 euros for this pillar. So we are still fighting for a concept, a citywide concept in design and size and mobility offer. We still do not know it, but we have got future outlook for mobility stations and upskilling possibilities, because there was a city council resolution in July 2019, and there it was decided that shared mobility is important for Munich, and there should be an upscaling also for mobility stations. But we still do not know if there will be like this in small hubs or bigger hubs, or it varies depending on the district. So still to decide which kind of concept we will roll out and upscale. Overall, to finish this, I think it's a really successful measure, and it's also a measure good for replication in other towns. It's not important if you got 100,000 inhabitants or 1 billion inhabitants, if you are in Madrid or in another country. The concept itself, however it might look and the design might vary, it's good for replication. And that you learn a little bit more about the evaluation results, I will hand over to Caroline to tell you a little bit more about the results.
Stefan, sorry to interrupt here. We actually already got quite a big range of questions.
Okay.
And I was just wondering if it's okay if I just ask some of those questions right now before we go to Caroline's presentation. And this is also thanks to everyone for already typing in your questions. Let me assure you that I'm taking them into consideration. So as the presentations go along, you can also feel free to just keep typing in your questions. But maybe, Stefan, I'm just going to ask some of these questions. And if you think that, for example, Caroline will answer them in her presentation, you can just say, we will hear about that from Caroline. And otherwise, maybe you can give a quick answer if that's okay.
Okay.
So the first question we got is, how supportive were the public and local stakeholders for this project? Was there any backlash?
Could you please?
Yeah, I can repeat it.
Yeah.
How supportive were the public and local stakeholders for this project? And has there been any backlash?
Yeah, it was very important and was a hard process actually. We turned a lot of rounds, like discussing rounds. For example, the involvement of different stakeholders from the municipality of Munich. We are all working under one roof, of course, but the interests of the departments are sometimes really not the same. So the communication, first of all, is very important. Let's say when it's about the location, so the first step where to plan and implement mobility stations. For example, this fourth mobility station in the Parkstadt South, what we could not implement right now. We actually wanted to start with the marking and signage and really like starting with the construction works for mobility station, and then there was a new resolution to change the plans for the street there. So we in last minute, so we noticed that doesn't make any sense to implement at this street mobility station. So it's really important in my view when it's about a district where there are construction works ongoing. And besides that, it's also important what we saw in the evaluation, because we did, for example, also evaluation, a qualitative evaluation. We had talks to residents, and they wanted to be part of the process of implementing a mobility station. So the representatives of the district, they had a chance to participate at this process, and this was important. Afterwards, we could always say when there were complaints about the size and the kind of parking spaces we offer, we could always say afterwards, sorry, you had the chance, we offered it 3 times, 4 times, we did a open workshop, everybody could join, you have the representatives and so on. So this was afterwards, we observed it was very important to offer this possibility to join as resident or with a representative of the residents this process. So very important to have the stakeholders with you.
Yeah, okay, thanks. There's 2 more questions about the costs. You gave a list of costs there, and the question is, first off, are those total costs? Are those costs per week, per month, per year? And the second question is, what will happen with the operating costs once the funding from Eccentric ends?
Yeah, first of all, first question. So the costs of infrastructure, I tried really to make it as clear as possible. It's
cost per infrastructure per station. So it's you invest it once. The signage, the marking, information pillar, rental bike system, so the installation, the information pillar production, and also the charging infrastructure. So this is a one-time investment. Of course, after let's say 3 or 4 years, this marking at the ground because of rain and winter time has to be made from new. But the cost for infrastructure are per station and only once. The cost for planning, well, it's an initial planning costs for development of information pillar, for example, the icon, for example, so you needed to invest only once. And the cost of communication, of course, depends on the kind of communication. So an inauguration open ceremony is only once, but it depends really how much flyers, merchandising articles, billboards, and promotion articles you wanna invest and promote. So that's really variable of costs. And the operating costs, okay, the rental bike system is per mouse, so I indicated here per mouse. Then we did have a contract with a car sharing provider for e-cars, so we support them, we subsidize them with a monthly rental or leasing cost. And the leasing contract is only for the time of the eccentric project, so for 48 months. And also the other operating costs are indicated that it's all per month. So social media marketing costs per month, film and picture material per month. I divided all the overall costs until now through the month the project is running. So therefore we have these costs per month.
Okay.
After the project, well, yeah, it's part of the municipality of Munich to, for example, keep the signature marking, because we have this resolution and a law that car sharing is promoted and has citywide an upscaling. So it's by law, it's the cost and the task of the city to yeah, keep the signage and pillar and so on. If there's damage, for example, with vandalism, it's the cost stays at the city also in the future.
Okay, right. Thank you. There's a couple more questions, but I would suggest that we first move on to Caroline's presentation, and then we will do another round of questions to both of you at the end of Caroline's presentation. And to all the attendees, thank you for asking your questions, and I will make sure that we will get to all of them. So Caroline, if I can hand the floor to you.
Thank you, Paula. Maybe one more question to you, Paula, as a moderator. How much time do I still have?
I mean, it's 10:45 now. We have the webinar scheduled until 11, but I think it's okay if we go a little bit over time. So roughly 10 minutes.
Okay, I try. Okay. So welcome everyone from my side. This is Caroline speaking. As introduced before, I'm working at the Technical University of Munich, and I'm the local evaluation manager for all 14 Munich measures. Let's continue with some of the evaluation results. The following slide should give you just some exemplary results of the overall Living Lab evaluation, just to get an impression. The car ownership ratio slightly increased from 0.93% in 2018 and to 0.96% 1.5 years later in autumn 2019. Just for the background, this data was obtained in our 2 comprehensive household surveys, which addressed the entire Living Lab and all households and residents. Looking at the small table on the right, you can see that there's a difference in car ownership ratio between the 2 Living Lab areas. As you heard, the Domak Park is the more residential area, there the car ownership ratio remains constant, whereas the ratio in Parkstadt Schwabe increased slightly, about 0.6%. That means in total there are less households not owning a car, and there are more households owning more than 2 cars, almost 3%. When we look deeper at the change in car ownership, we can see that 4% abolished their car, while 9% replaced one car by another one. 2% purchased the car for the first time, and 4% bought an additional car. And of course, for 81%, so the biggest share, there was no change in car ownership. Regarding the mode shift, comparing the numbers of the Living Lab per household from 2018 and 2019, people are less walking and cycling, they are less using their car, and there are 3% more people using public transport. But what is there also to see? There is a constant use of sharing options like bike and car sharing in the Living Lab. And even if the number of sharing options from 2018 and 19 should have maybe changed because of the implementation of the mobility stations, it didn't increase. We assume that the eccentric project lifetime is just too short to observe a major change in the mobility behavior of the Living Lab residents towards those more sustainable modes. And in addition, one more thing, owning a car still plays a big role in Germany. That means people want to be independent and flexible, and yes. Now let's come to the evaluation results for our measure 5.9, the mobility stations in particular. The following slides show some exemplary results regarding our key performance indicators, awareness, satisfaction, and system usage. Please note, unless indicated otherwise, the following slides are individual answers and not by household. So to start with something nicely visualized, both figures show the walking accessibility to a mobility station within a 5-minute radius for 2018 and 2020. The blue-colored line shows the outline of the Living Lab, and the blue-colored space shows the 5-minute radius around the mobility station. The gray highlighted areas show the 5-minute radius for other public bike and car sharing stations, which are very close and around in the neighborhood. Whereas 2 mobility stations covered an area of 77% of the Living Lab in 2018, the 3 mobility stations in 2020 cover almost 90% of the research area. And looking outside the research area even more, because the station in the really north of the Living Lab is also attracting adjacent neighborhoods. Of course, we were asking in the household survey for the awareness of the mobility stations. The awareness varies between the different mobility stations. You can see below in the figure the 3 different mobility stations. I also included the e-mobility station, which is located on private ground in Fritz-Winter-Straße. That's the first column. Yeah, the majority of the participants is aware of the e-mobility station in Fritz-Winter-Straße and Gertrud-Krono-Straße. Remember, Fritz-Winter-Straße is the one on private ground, and it's already implemented in 2016, so people are aware of it. And the mobility station in Gertrud-Krono-Straße is very centrally located within the Living Lab. So maybe that's also one reason it's quite well known among the residents. 37% are aware of the mobility station in Marianne-Brandt-Straße, which is located within the neighborhood with a higher car ownership ratio and much business. And in addition to that, it located more in a street without much transit traffic, so that could be another reason of being less known among the residents. Where comes the awareness from is the next question. So we ask the residents how they actually hear about the mobility stations. Most of the participants stated to be ran by it, so almost half of the participants of the household survey, and only a small number answered that they were informed by internet advertisement or word of mouth recommendation. The advertisement by the City of Munich and its partners, which made 16% of the share, and the color markings at the station, 13%, were most successful in raising the awareness of the mobility stations. To look deeper into the advertisement of the mobility stations and maybe learn which options were the most promising ways of advertising, we have the following figure. 19% actually stated that they didn't notice any advertisement, but another small percentage noticed digital advertisement via the internet platforms like Facebook or YouTube or other internet channels. Advertisement in press made 13% of the share. Events, word of mouth recommendation, and public spaces are still important in today's digital world. So we can see that the analog advertisement was quite successful in this case. Here we look at the system usage. We could get some important information about the monthly number of rented vehicles from the mobility service providers. We got this information for the two mobility stations located in public space, the Gertrud-Kronow-Straße and the mobility station in Marianne-Brand-Straße. What we see here is that people tend to use less car sharing options during wintertime compared to spring and summer. That's not very surprising though, especially for the bike sharing options. Looking at the orange line, the number during winter season is even 0, but that's simply because Emmy does not have any scooters on the road during winter time. Most surprising was the peak in May and June 2019. So what happened here? Actually, that's when another of Munich's measures took place. Stefan already told you about it very briefly. That's the direct and dialogue marketing campaign, which aims to inform the residents about mobility-related offers in their neighborhood. This information material was sent via post to all Living Lab households. It offers incentives, for example, like vouchers and test offers, and in addition to that, it's possible to get individual consultation via experts via phone. 34% of the households which ordered information material ordered especially information about the mobility station. I think this shows a very fruitful cooperation between the Munich measures. Looking at the general usage of the mobility stations, here are some numbers obtained during the second household survey in 2019. We asked for all services and mobility offers a mobility station provides, if the residents actually use it, they know it but don't use it, both highlighted in green shades, or if the service of mobility offers is still unknown. This is colored in gray. We can see throughout quite high percentages of people knowing about the offers. Only a small percentage tells about those who actually use the mobility services. The most frequently used mode still is the conventional car sharing, not a big surprise, followed by bike sharing and electric car sharing. But other transport options like the electric scooter called Emmy is also very known among the residents. 81% state to know it, but I think this can probably be attributed to the very eye-catching design and color of this vehicle. But the figure shows not only the usage of the mobility options, but also the other services Stefan mentioned before. There is an information pillar and a charging infrastructure for electric vehicles provided at each mobility station. Not as many which know about the mobility offers know about the information pillar, but that could also show that this service might not be needed so much, or people just know how to rent the mobility offer after once doing it, and there's just simply no need to make use of the pillar again. The charging infrastructure provided for the electrical vehicles is well known though. When looking at the trip purpose of people using their mobility stations, it can be seen that 1/3 of the residents using the mobility station offers for leisure purpose, and 14% use the offers for shopping, 12% use them for their way from or to work or school, and 40% state to use the mobility offers for other purposes. Unfortunately, those other purposes were not further defined in our household survey. So let's come to my second last slide, and let's look at one more mentioned KPI, the satisfaction. The figure shows which characteristics of the mobility station in Lohmark Park and Parkstadt Schwabing are rated advantageous by the users. And you can see on the left, most positively rated is the proximity of the stations to the individual residence and or working place. 87% of the participants rated this as advantageous or very advantageous. Remember our 5-minute walking radius map from some slides before? This can, in my opinion, closely be connected to the high percentage of covered space within the 5-minute walking radius. After that, the proximity of the stations is followed by the freedom of the users to have the choice between several means of transport at the station. So 77% state that to be advantageous or very advantageous. The safety finding a parking space in situ is also seen as a advantage of the mobility stations. Before implementing, we predicted that to be one of the biggest issues for not using the mobility stations, because people could be scared or annoyed by not getting a parking space. But it came out that this is very positively rated. And also during our user workshops we did in the Living Lab. Other reasons for satisfaction is the uncomplicated possibility to change between different kinds of modes and means of transport. And of course, there's always a safety finding different means of transport. This last slide shows some reasons for dissatisfaction and thus for potential for improvement of the service. The smaller pie charts show the results for the single mobility stations, but let's look at the average numbers of all 3 mobility stations. As heard on the slide before, the vehicle availability seems to be good at the stations. So only 2% on average stated this as a reason for not using the mobility stations. The price of the services also seems to play a minor role. The complexity of the renting system was stated by 9% on average, is probably mainly a barrier to assume for elderly people due to the required technical skills. By far the main aspect why people do not use the mobility station is that there's simply no need to do so. So 75% on average state that. The high percentage of car ownership in combination with a very good public transport in the research area may serve as an explanation here. This again shows how difficult it is to change one's mobility behavior and habits despite having a high willingness to do so. So that was quite quickly going through the evaluation part. So thank you for your attention. Do you have any questions? Paula, I give the lead to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we can keep the slide on, but there's actually quite a lot of questions. And in order to, thanks all for asking your questions. In order to keep it short, I would like to ask you both, Caroline and Stefan, to maybe give some short and concise answers so we can give the chance to everyone to get their questions answered. And yeah, Caroline, I think also what plays into the evaluation you presented is that you actually look at a quite short time frame to really represent change in mobility behavior. So it would probably be also interesting to do the same study again in 5 or 10 years, I guess.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, so that we have a question from Matthew to Stefan. First of all, he says, thank you, Stefan, for the presentation. The question is, in terms of components of mobility stations, you have mentioned 2 charging points. Are those also available? Are they just available for car sharing vehicles, or are they also available for private use?
Yeah, they are depending. It depends really on the signature of the car sharing spot. So there's a law. For example, we marked some spots with privileged e-cars, e-car sharing, and e-cars. So one spot is for sharing and one is only for e-cars. So it's also possible for private cars, and it's not for sharing exclusively.
Okay, great, thanks. And then there's a question, this relates, I think, to the question you just answered about the city's relationship with the providers of sharing services at the station. Has there been a public tender? Do they pay a rental fee for the space? What kind of contract do you have with the sharing providers?
Yes, they have to pay per car license. So it's about 30 euros per month. So per month and per car. They pay per month and per car.
The providers of the car sharing service?
Car sharing providers, yes.
And did you go out with a public tender to find providers?
Yeah, this is, well, this is out of their Eccentric project. So this is no matter if they provide the car at the mobility station or somewhere else in town, they have to pay this license.
Okay. And I think you mentioned this in your presentation, but just to clarify, the intermodal mobility stations, they are linked to public transport facilities, right?
Yes, linked in the meaning of that it's still in walking distance. Let's say 5 minutes, about 5 minutes, yeah. And there is bus connection and tram connection. This was a criteria for the spatial analysis.
And we have another question from Carlos. It's about the competition for these mobility stations. How does this concept compete with other free-floating mobility systems in the city?
Not at all. Actually, the mobility providers for the sharing systems, they are kind of fans of the mobility stations because we provide for them exclusively privileged car sharing spots. So normally in rest of the town, you can park your car at free parking lots, but only at our mobility stations we have the signature and the colored parking spots. So it's easier to bring the car back, and you don't have complaints from your customers.
Okay, yeah, great, thank you. We have a question for Caroline. There's a slide that shows a decrease in walking and cycling modal shares. Do you know if the cyclists who switched from the bicycle to a shared vehicle were using shared bicycles or their own bicycle before? And how do you explain generally this decrease?
Actually, I don't know about the shift from private to shared bike, but I know that the percentage of people owning a private bike is very high. So assumably there's not that big shift. If you have an own bike, you might still use your own bike, then shifting towards bike sharing. But the general shift, that's, for me personally, that's not very easy to explain, because yeah, as you can see, the time frame was quite short, and yeah, there's just no big change.
Okay, thanks. There's a question regarding the 5-minute walking distance. Do you also have data for people using mobility stations in a radius that is bigger than 5 minutes from the mobility station?
We haven't done this kind of a map with a bigger radius, but it's easy to do that.
Okay, yeah. And then I guess there's a clarification question also about the maintenance of the mobility stations. It is true that the City of Munich is responsible for maintaining the mobility stations, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And then maybe, I guess this could be a final question. Oh, no, I see there's more questions. That's fine. Would you consider implementing mobility stations adjacent to car parking structures and maybe further away from the center? I guess kind of like a park and ride situation. That's a question from Thomas.
Huh. Interesting question. Well, what we observed is it can be really in the outskirts, like park and ride, but normally park and ride is in the middle of nowhere, so it's not recommendable. What we observed is that it's advantageous that it's really near connected where residents live, so in walking distance, and this is not the case normally with park and ride structure.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and do you think that a change in travel behavior and patterns in the future will lead to an increase in people using the mobility stations in the upcoming years? Just what is your assessment of the situation? Maybe to both Caroline and Stefan.
I really think that this increase will occur, especially when looking at the like the age groups which are using mobility stations. Those are mainly like, let's say younger generations, which are maybe a bit more aware of the using sustainable transport modes. So yes, I would say there will be an increase.
And in my view, so what we observed, and we discussed it in the City of Munich in my department, the future could be that you have high density of mobility stations, and it's not depending on the size of the mobility station. So the success factor is not that it is like as big as possible with 15 or 20 parking spots, but more than that you have a high density of car sharing options, and sometimes maybe it's only 5 or 6 car sharing spots and one charging infrastructure and not 2. And sometimes when there is like a high density of population with skyscrapers where people live in, you need 20 or 25 park sharing spots and more charging infrastructure. But you have to bring and install this mobility offer and all the services directly to the residential areas and districts.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And now I think I dare to say there's kind of 2 final questions. One is about the 70% of residents that say they don't need the service. Have you conducted any more in-depth research on the demographics to understand the age ranges? those who don't need the service, and maybe that would be useful to understand which are other typologies or mobility solutions to offer for the residents. That is one, and I also want to pick up a question that has been raised by a couple of attendees, which is, in what way do you think COVID-19 affects those mobility stations at the moment?
Maybe me answering to the first question about looking more a bit deeper at the demographics. Unfortunately, I don't have the numbers with me, but as I said before, of course, there's kind of a target group of like the younger people, or not the very elderly people using the mobility stations. And there are almost always for each mode more men using mobility stations than women. But I'm sorry to say that's the only thing I can tell by now.
All right. Yeah, thanks. Stefan,
the
any
second
comments?
question was about the effect.
Yeah.
So could you repeat it, please?
Yeah, the question was just how the Corona crisis right now affects the mobility stations, and if you also really foresee any long-term effects of it.
Yeah. Yeah. It affects the sharing markets. So, and therefore also the offers at the mobility station. So one of the biggest providers in Germany is ShareNow. It's a merger, a fusion of Mercedes and BMW. It took place in February, and they wrote us a letter 2 weeks ago, the City of Munich, that they are afraid of their complete business model in Germany, and they don't want to pay the license anymore per month for their cars they have in Munich. So therefore, you see they are in trouble right now. On the other side, from Sixt Share, so you all know Sixt, they have a sharing system they implemented last September in Germany. And Sixt Share says no, they can feel any negative consequence due to Corona. But from the other sharing providers, also the e-scooters, they are kind of reluctant to roll out all their e-scooters now in the spring, what they do normally. We don't have any feedback from the bike sharing providers, but I think they they will be successful, of course, because bike sharing doesn't have any risk with Corona. But from the car sharing, some are in trouble in our view. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. Great. Thank you both so much. And thank you also for the engaged audience for asking all your questions. I'm sorry if I went over some of them, but we will make sure to make this recording available to all of you, so you can go back to it if you want to. And as I already said, we're currently in the process of developing quite some material that can give some more guidance on how to replicate some of the measures, not only the measure that Munich has implemented, but also other measures that have been part of the CIVITAS ECCENTRIC project. And you will be able to find out about this material through the channels where you've also learned about this webinar. We will be promoting them. Go check out the CIVITAS ECCENTRIC website where you can find more information about this. We actually have a final suggestion from Thomas saying maybe it would be interesting to add a kiosk or waiting area to the mobility stations. Maybe that's something you want to do in Munich when you roll out the mobility station plan more widely in the whole city. But I think for now, I want to thank again Caroline and Stefan, you for being here today, and thanks to all the attendees. Enjoy the rest of the day, and we hope this was useful for you also.